He was raised on a farm in rural Georgia. He had a brief career in the Navy, then returned home to his family's peanut growing business. He opposed segregation and supported the civil rights movement. He served in the state Senate, then a single term as governor of Georgia. As a little-known Washington outsider, he won the Democratic presidential nomination and then defeated President Ford to win the presidency. During his term in office, he established a national energy policy and confronted high inflation and slow economic growth. He oversaw the return of the Panama Canal to Panama, and in his biggest foreign policy achievement, he brokered the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. He was defeated for re-election by Ronald Reagan after working through the final hours of his presidency to free the Iranian hostages. He retired to his native Georgia. In his post-presidential years, he established the Carter Center to promote human rights, has traveled extensively to monitor elections, promote peace, and work at disease eradication, has authored numerous books, and has closely worked with charities such as Habitat for Humanity. He is our nation's 39th chief executive, Jimmy Carter. Let's take a look at a map of the state of Georgia and some sites associated with Jimmy Carter. Carter was born in Plains, Georgia, which is right about here, and he's basically lived there his entire life. He was the first president born in a hospital, so he was born in a hospital in Plains. And in Plains, you can see the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site, which is run by the National Park Service. You can see the house where he grew up on the family farm. And then you can also see a number of buildings associated with his life and his presidential campaign in 1976. You can see the Plains High School, the building that used to be Plains High School, where Jimmy and his wife Rosalind both went to school. You can also see the campaign office in Plains and the Billy Carter gas station in Plains. So there's a number of interesting things to see there. And there's a museum inside the former high school. Also, President Carter continues to live in Plains, Georgia. He has now been the longest living former president and also the oldest president in history. And he does sometimes still teach Sunday school at the Baptist Church, the Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains, and you can go there some Sundays and go to his Sunday school class. The Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum is in Atlanta, which is another good site to visit. The Carter Center is also located at the same location. Now let's take a look at some photos of these locations. Let's take a look at some books in my library relating to Jimmy Carter. This book was published in 2016. It's by Dorothy Paget, and it's called Jimmy Carter, Elected President with Pocket Change and Peanuts. And this book talks about the Peanut Brigade in Georgia, which was a group of Jimmy Carter's friends and supporters in Georgia who traveled the country and worked hard for his election in 1976. And it's got a lot of good campaign anecdotes and stories from that election. This is a great book published in 2019 by John Ward. It's Camelot's End, Kennedy versus Carter, and the Fight That Broke the Democratic Party. Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, of course, challenged President Carter in the Democratic primaries when Carter sought renomination in 1980. And this book covers their lives up to that point, which were very different. Of course, Kennedy growing up in the wealthy, famous Kennedy family in New England, and Carter growing up in rural Georgia and being an outsider when he ran for president in 1976. So there was an animosity between them, which culminated in the 1980 election. So it covers that contest as well as their relationship after the 1980 election. Another good book published in 1998 by Douglas Brinkley is The Unfinished Presidency, Jimmy Carter's Journey Beyond the White House. And it covers pretty extensively Carter's post-presidential activities up to that point, including his work in establishing the Carter Center and working for peace, monitoring elections, things of that nature, as well as his work with Habitat for Humanity and his advising of the presidents that succeeded him. It's kind of interesting to think that he'd had such a long post-presidency already in 1998, and here we are 22 years later, and Carter is still very active. This book is called Ghost Wars, The Secret History of the CIA, Afghanistan, and Bin Laden, from the Soviet Invasion to September 10th, 2001. It's by Steve Cole, and it was published in 2004. And the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, of course, happened during this time period in 1979. I have several books by President Carter, and we'll start with his presidential memoirs, which are called Keeping Faith, Memoirs of a President, and they were originally published in 1982. It's quite a good account of the issues and the challenges that he faced during his presidency, and I find particularly interesting his account of the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. This is a good book published in 1992. It's called Turning Point, A Candidate, a State, and a Nation Come of Age. And Carter talks about his race in 1962 for the state senate in Georgia. And the tale really centers around the issues of civil rights and segregation and voter fraud and voter intimidation. This is a book that was published after the Carters left the White House. It was actually published in 1987. It's called Everything to Gain, Making the Most of the Rest of Your Life. And it's a book about, we were just talking about his post-presidency. It's a book about how after your retirement or after a big change in your life, how you can have impact. And certainly the Carters have done that. This is a great book that came out in 2015. It's called A Full Life, Reflections at 90. And Carter goes through different parts of his life and offers a lot of reflections from the different stages of his life. This is a book called Faith, A Journey for All, that was published in 2018. And in this book, Carter talks about how faith has sustained him throughout his life. And lastly, I have something of an artifact from the Carter administration. This book is As If You Were President, or this booklet. This was something that my brother got as a child. Came from the Carter White House, and it tells about the White House and the presidency, and it has a number of interesting photographs in it. There's a family photograph of the Carters in the White House. Our next episode will take a look at our nation's 40th president, Ronald Reagan.